Hi, this is Jeff Blauette, Technical Agronomist for Cooperative Farmers Elevator. And on this week's Field Friday segment, I thought we'd talk about one of the next phases of management we need to work on here is thinking about protecting this corn crop, maybe with a fungicide application. We're getting to that point in time. You see here, this corn was planted the 16th of May. We've got some silks emerging. The tassels won't be far behind. There's a few fields that were planted earlier. You start to see a few tassels around. Of course, in this heat, it's been just miserable and muggy for everybody, but it's helped move this corn along, helped us try and catch up a little bit. Next week's forecast looks a little cooler, so if we start thinking about protecting this corn crop, with diseases, there's always, certain things that are important. They call it a disease triangle. You have to have the host crop, which in this case, of course, is corn. We have to have the environment that's conducive, and we have to have the disease pressure. If we have those three things, diseases are possible. And of course, genetics are a part of this. Certain hybrids are more tolerant or resistant to certain diseases, and those are good things to know as well. But this hot and humid weather is really conducive to gray leaf spot infection. We really don't see much out here just yet, but we're going to have potential to start seeing some of those things popping up as if they happen to hit this week. The disease lesions would start to show up here soon. Now with the weather forecast next week being a little bit cooler, maybe even just a tick below normal. Our normals are about mid-80s this time of year. That's more conducive to maybe like a northern corn leaf blight. So those are some of the things that environment and disease-wise are possibilities. But we need to consider, last couple years we've had some pretty good disease pressure. Last year we had some really big disease responses from fungicide, anywhere from 10 to 40 bushel, with 20 to 25 being quite common. So I know a lot of the guys last year were kind of debating whether to play the game with $3 corn, and the guys that did wish they'd have done more acres because of the response and the return even at the low price of corn. Now there's a 4 in front of it with some optimism that it might even be better as we get into next winter. But it's pretty good if you have a $4 corn price. If you start looking at the response potentials with what we have for stress and humidity, it might be a very good decision to consider. There's lots of different fungicides. They all have different strengths and weaknesses, and your CFE agronomist can help you with that. But there are some newer fungicides. Trevapro, for instance, is one of our more common fungicides that we're looking at today. It's got 3 different modes of action. We've got longer lasting residual on those, and that's pretty important for trying to protect this crop as long as we can. They're going to be a little bit of a premium price. There's also some options at a little bit lower price that are either 1 or 2 modes of action and maybe don't have the residual, but it'll still give you some good benefit in some of the plant health response. But some things to think about. We're going to have a wide swing of pollination dates and therefore needed fungicide dates. This later planted corn especially, it's going to probably be pollinating into August. Those fields concern me with some late season corn aphids also, those late planted fields, especially if they're surrounded by fields that are not late planted. Corn aphids can come in and really raise cane with those, so we can have a ride-along insecticide as an option there. There's no aphids out here yet today. They like cooler and that type of condition, and we haven't had that recently, but something we have battled the last number of years. A lot of guys, especially with fuller season corn, know that has been a problem. And the other thing with some of these, if the corn price continues to be positive, we can throw in a ride-along micronutrient as a boron. Boron's pretty important in that reproductive phase of this corn, so that might be something to evaluate potentially, especially on a nicer looking field that has even higher yield potential. There's a decent chance you'll get a response out of that as well. So just some things to think about at this juncture of the year. We've got at least a fairly decent crop on some fields. You're not going to be doing all your fields potentially. If you have some that look better, those would be the ones I'd prioritize, but at least give it a thought, and we've got a chance to increase our profitability and our yields on these things. With one last thought, most of our fungicides do help our plant health and therefore our stock quality. We probably are going to have wetter corn. And if we have wetter corn because it's later pollinating and we're later in the season, we probably want those stalks to be as healthy as we can so they'll continue to stand and allow that corn to dry some in the field. So the fungicides will help us with that as well. So just some things to think about. Talk to your CFE agronomist and evaluate the options. And we're getting to that point where those decisions are imminent here. So With that, that's this week's Field Friday segment, and we'll see you next week.